Is humanity meant to leave Earth? If you said anything other than yes, then unfortunately you're a huge dork. The reality is everything wants to take us out on this planet and everything wants to take us out in space. So what's the problem? I mean, really think about this logically. If we were immortals on this planet, it might be one of those things to think like, oh, space is bad because it's dangerous, but so far on this planet, it has a 100% KD ratio in the K category. The air oxidizes us, the sun causes cancer, mutations arise in our genetic coding during replication, and animals are pretty dangerous. Sometimes cats bite you and you get infections. Everything wants to take us out. And we are racing against a ticking clock anyhow. In a billion years, the surface of Earth will be sterilized by our own sun. The reality is, there's only one option for humanity if we don't want to go extinct. Get off this rock and become a multi-system species. After all, the stars are ours. And yeah, a subset of scientists from a specific set of science, say that 3 times fast, will tell you that this is impossible. But never forget the same nerds say like back in the 1900s, that a group of 100 scientists could get together for a million years, or maybe it was a million scientists could get together for a million years, and man would still never fly. And then the Wright brothers flew a week later. Anyhow, this ticking clock is assumed to be further out, but what if we had considerably less time than originally thought? In the movie Sunshine, this appears to be as such. As the sun, for some unknown reason, begins putting out less energy than it usually does, it is discovered that for almost probably no reason at all, the sun's core has gone defunct. As humanity intervenes, the original mission goes horribly. Realizing they made a big oopsie-doopsies, they then send a second mission out with the same name, Icarus. Many will know that is a bad idea. However, approaching the sun has a tremendous set of challenges and dangers that appears to have affected the first crew. So in today's episode, this isn't going to be some ethereal consequence, but real-world issues, I guess, but actual real-world problems. So don't look directly at the sun sort of science. Let's get to it. As we kick off today's story with the sun, again, don't look into it. The sun is evidently dying, and we face extinction. Somehow, we are going to restart that nerd. A stellar concussive force detonator the size of Manhattan is going to enter the sun, not be melted immediately, and then get to the core, detonating and somehow get it moving again. Or maybe the blast radius was the size of Manhattan. Do you know how small Manhattan is compared to the sun? Anyways, 8 astronauts are strapped to the back of this bad boy, riding it towards the star. As one man named Dr. Sorrell, who will affectionately be known as Dr. Serrano the rest of the time, looks up at the sun, he asks Cortana to bring it up to 2% brightness. Riding the lightning, he then suggests bring it up to 4%, being only 36 million miles away. At that level, his retinas would be burned out of his head. But hey, if the sun is getting weaker, that also means maybe Venus will be habitable soon enough. You just need to form plate tectonics and she will be good to go. And this is actually what happened. There's a massive amount of turnover on Earth, with the crust being subducted quite regularly. Venus never got the memo, so it stagnated, heated up, and it's now a complete hellscape. The hottest planet in the solar system, actually. Which someone will say that's not true, it's actually Mercury. No, it is Venus, because the atmosphere is so thick it holds on to way too much heat. So bringing it up to 3.1% for 30 seconds, he allegedly should be good to go at looking at the sun, except for the massive skin damage that we will see later. Brilliant, Doctor. Bringing it up, it's super bright, and much like Newton, he then blinds himself for a few seconds, which no lie, during Isaac Newton's experiments, he burned his retinas looking at the sun, freaked out, and then hid in a completely black room for a few weeks until his vision corrected. I am the modern day Isaac Newton, as I have effectively flashbanged myself installing an outdoor light the other day that kept blowing the light fuses that I was buying. I thought maybe something was wrong with the power. Turns out it was just the cords were wrong. Anyways, I have no idea why I thought doing this was gonna work somehow. So like a Chad, I touched the black wire to the white wire and created the brightest thing I've ever seen in my life. For like 30 minutes, I had a blind spot in the center of my vision. It eventually fixed itself, but that was completely stupid. And to answer your question, yes, I have electrocuted myself quite a few times in my lifespan. So anyways, as the crew meets in the room, they're cooking, which appears to be incredibly dangerous, as then they talk about the darkness and how it becomes you. If you stare at the void long enough, it stares back. And if you stare at the feline version of the void, it meows back and wants chicken. Dr. Serrano, however, is completely tripping. As everyone eats, they continue their trek towards the sun as the solar wind apparently is much higher than it was initially supposed to be. And in 24 hours, it is entirely possible, nay, probable, that they will not be able to call home at all. So everyone decides to send a message back to Earth to their families, just in case everything goes from bad to worse, which I am sure won't happen, as everything will turn out exactly as they thought it will, and they hold hands and sing Kumbaya and enjoy their life in their long lifespans, I suppose. Also, they have free falling water on this ship onto plants. I'm not gonna lie, this seems like an incredibly wasteful way to water plants with the limited amount of water that they should have, and limited space, and limited everything. Then again, I'm a biologist, not an engineer, although I did get a scholarship for aerospace engineering back in the day, but it turns out I suck at math. How did that even happen? So as everyone continues to look at the sun blasting X-rays into their eyeballs, a fight breaks out amongst the astronaut nerds as Captain America over here apparently loses track of time quite regularly. He's got space madness. So as he looks at the camera directly, he claims, "I won't lose track again." Yeah, okay, yeah. So go ahead and put him in the brig. He's lost his mind. And then heading over to the Earth room to chill out, he says the waves make him feel peaceful. Heading over to Scarecrow's hydroponics room after that, he apologizes to him. So you're telling me this aggression level never showed up during training, like, at all? Unlikely. As another astronaut then watches a video, he looks at some dude's eyes talking about solar wind as Captain America gets some goo on his hand. For your edification, it was the previous crew sending back messages before they were lost to the all-consuming sun. They were Icarus 1, mission so nice that they named it the same thing twice after a guy who flies too close to the sun, burns off his wings, and then falls to his doom because of his arrogance. Very good. So as they fly towards the sun, they spot Mercury passing in front of them. Everyone is super jazzed to see it as they end up flying past it entirely. I mean, that was the plan, so it's not a bad thing, but because of the iron content on Mercury, it is able to act as a strong antenna, which then allows them to pick up a signal. Playing the file, they hear a noise that continues to repeat. Icarus 1 is sending out a distress signal, and they are still alive, allegedly. Ah yes, this ship 2, after the original one, failed. So plotting a course, the ship appears to be orbiting the sun, but its distress signal was blocked out by the sheer amount of noise, I guess you could call it, like, emanating from the sun, like radiation, the sun's own radio signals, and the fact that nobody would be able to spot this thing anyhow because the sun just is too bright. So a massive debate breaks out amongst the master debaters as to if they should change course to check on the ship to see if there are any survivors. But it's been like 3 to 4 years. Sure, if they maintain their food reserves, growing it much like the second ship did, but 3 to 4 years, everybody there's gonna be in rough shape. Captain America says they can't save them, how cowardly, but the concussive force detonator they have is all theory and politics. However, if they go to secure the second concussive force detonator as well, they would have 2 chances to blow up the sun, which is their intended goal. But that's all theory and politics as well, so it could take 3 or 4 or even 876,377,416. We really just don't know what it would take to restart the sun's nuclear core. Granted, how do you even deliver that core without it melting? Your guess is as good as mine. Let's find out. So Dr. Serrano then defers to Scarecrow, as apparently that's the ship's physicist. They run the numbers again, as the coronal hole is the place that they're kind of aiming for at the South Pole, but Cortana doesn't know if, really it's even going to work, as space-time kind of gets wonky there. So basically, if they can't figure that out here, how do they figure that out back on Earth? If you said they didn't, well, you're absolutely correct. This is basically a shot in the dark, but it beats doing nothing, I suppose. So Scarecrow then says it's a guess, not a distinction being made. But 2 chances are better than 1, so they alter course. Because of this alteration, though, this gives Dr. Serrano another chance to blow out his eyes some more. Meanwhile, Scarecrow's having nightmares, on brand, as another astronaut is there, asking him if it was a good dream. No. But this is this far into the mission with no privacy. I guess the only dreams you would be having are the good ones. But you know what would help them pass the time? Today's sponsor. Let me tell you about a game, specifically the one the crew could have played, more so given the time they had to travel to the sun. What if I told you that if you stick around till the end, you can find out how to get an exclusive bonus as well? Because today, this episode is sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends. In the immortalized words of Ezio, if monsters are man-made, then let man unmake them. It goes pretty hard as a pro-human statement, I'm not gonna lie. But Assassin's Creed has joined Raid. 5 iconic assassins from the Assassin's Creed franchise are here. Ezio Auditore de Firenze, Edward Kenway, Bayek, Basim, and Cassandra are all joining Raid Shadow Legends as legendary champions for a limited time, and players can get Ezio for free by logging into the game for 7 days. Once you've recruited Ezio to your collection by logging in for 7 days, continue logging in for another 7 days to keep the rewards flowing with gear to help Ezio get up to speed quickly. There are also additional ways, such as dedicated events, tournaments, and summon boosts to obtain the other assassins. Edward, Cassandra, who is actually the first champion from Raid's newest faction, the Argonauts, which there will be more of them in the future, Bayek, and Basim. But I can hear you. What of the event dungeon antagonist, Roanoke? Good question. This time around, it's Pontiff Augustine, a religious zealot who has discovered a piece of Eden in Teleria and is using it for his own gain. He's residing in the event dungeon, where you can take the fight to him and earn time-limited chronophage gear, as well as gear from other valuable sets. If players unlock all 6 champions during the event, they will earn an exclusive bonus reward as a special thank you. If you haven't started playing yet, then what are you waiting for? Click the link in my description or scan the QR code and get amazing bonuses available only via my link. Right now, you'll get 2 legendary champions and 2 free epics. Instantly unlock a huge starter pack with Epic Grizzled Jarl from the Dwarves faction. He's a lot stronger than people might expect. Reach level 15 to get another amazing Epic Ugo, one of the most valuable champions in game. Again, log in for 7 days to claim a free legendary champion Ezio from Assassin's Creed. New players can pick one of 6 promo codes for a free legendary champion of their choice. I advise you to pick the code Monkey King because he's a Monkey King. What more can I say? These champions are available after downloading via my custom link or QR only 48 hours after downloading. With my link, if you go directly to the app stores or use the other link to download, you won't get these packages that Raids team sent me. So make sure you download with the link, then use promo code in-game. Come find me under the name Roanoke and join my clan, Croatoan. The alarms now start going off as the absolutely predictable approach to the sun was predictable, but their shields are off by just a small amount, 1.1% actually. So trajectory scientist extraordinaire over here messed up, and now they are all exposed to potentially massive doses of radiation as their electronics are fried. He forgot to account that changing directions meant the shielding would not be in the same position. How the robot that can identify crew internal to the ship would run simulations of this trajectory to protect the crew is beyond me, because actually later she won't even let you do certain things because it could jeopardize the mission. Like, how did this actually happen? Anyways, what's even more interesting is there is no way you guys would actually... there's no way they could fix it or angle the ship differently from inside. Bizarre. So they strap on their gear, which they put on super cool sweatbands as well, and dripped out suits so they can actually move outside, but they're going to have to sacrifice their comms tower to get behind the shielding. What's more bizarre is this is ridiculous. The radiation of the sun is just that, radiation. So there's several different types of like heat transference, convection, conduction, and radiation. Radiation moves through vacuums, conduction moves through like touching, and convection just moves through environments. The heat does not transfer well in a vacuum, so being close to the sun, unless the light is actively hitting you, it'll be really cold, really, really cold. If the sun does hit you, that'll not be a problem for you, no matter what you're wearing in like 0.12 seconds, especially this close. So heading to space, the last place uncorrupted by capitalism, or so I've heard, they release a payload of sorts as the ship then turns and their shielding is beginning to expose them. The metal begins contracting and expanding on the shielding as some heats up and some cools. Pretty great for the bolts there, I am sure. One of the comms towers just gets absolutely obliterated by the sun as Team Don't Get Cooked in Space approaches the first panel. Sweating like whores on Judgment Day, which again makes no sense. The sun doesn't create a ball of warmth around it ambiently. It's the radiation making like contact that becomes heat. Otherwise, behind the shielding, if you can't see the sun, it's cold. This is like thinking that if you're out in the sunlight and space around Earth, that somehow it would be much cooler. No, it's still going to be hot AF. For reference, like on the backside of Mercury, which the planet itself, I guess, would be like the shielding in this case, it's negative 290 degrees Fahrenheit in the Lord's units, or in heathenistic metric, which I don't think anybody uses anymore. That's around like negative 180 degrees Celsius. The sun doesn't just warm up the planet by being around. It's not warm in space. Anyways, huge L on the physics here, guys. Anyhow, so they begin working on the panel as they get it closed. Unfortunately, hydroponics gets blown up. Oops. Now there goes your oxygen production, I suppose. Equally important, also, but less pressing, is food production. So moving to the next panel, the ship starts moving as it then starts overriding their altered mission parameters because the ship is in jeopardy. Oh, so now Cortana actually notices the ship's in jeopardy. Good work. So one of the astronauts gets trapped by an airlock as priority becomes about getting the fire contained. What was she doing in there when everybody else was at the front of the ship? Don't really know. Also, they should have known hydroponics would get blasted if the comms towers were getting blasted, just simply by the ship behaving the way that it is. Anyway, so they're going to apparently dump O2, the oxygen that they have a very finite supply of because hydroponics just got blasted apart and there's literally no other form of fire suppression system on the ship. Anyway, so that oxygen is going to be pumped in there to create a flashover to burn itself out as she appears deep fried extra crispy, except she's lucky, so no. Meanwhile, back out of the shielding, it's beginning to turn. Not ideal. Luckily, that shielding is at 91% in full sunlight, and then 94%. And would you believe it, 97%, as the captain sees straight up light coming towards him, and then he is 100% obliterated. Scarecrow gets behind the shielding just in time as, Dr. Serrano appears to have a slight skin condition developing, a severe sunburn from hanging out in the retina blasting chamber. We will talk about that later, and why getting sunburns is bad for you. Trey then gets sedated as he's sewer slided risk, and the oxygen garden is completely destroyed. They apparently don't have enough oxygen to actually complete their mission, let alone get home, so they have to board Icarus 1, Icarus 3 mission coming to a sun near you in 3 to 4 years. Realizing this is going to be really bad as there's just not enough oxygen to get everyone there, they need to lose 2 people. Oof. Imagine saying oof in 2026. Happy New Year! Of course, nobody here is seeing the silver lining of this entire situation. I mean, not the whole, they're totally going to meet their end thing, but the reality is, if the sun goes out, that means back on Earth, the anglerfish also goes extinct. Man can leave the planet. That abomination will be forced to freeze and die. So, huge loss on the planet, but once again, there's always silver linings if you look for them. So having the most ridiculously large room I've ever seen on a ship, I mean, here's an idea. Why not take the oxygen from that room and then move it into the room you're in? There must be a way to do this. Or stop supplying oxygen to that room. There must be some way. I don't know. So, there's like so much dead space in this ship. There has to be a way to do this. So checking the nuclear option here, or at least stop providing oxygen to those rooms. That might help. So checking the nuclear option here, Scarecrow suggests it'll be like a Big Bang on a small scale. Neato. So basically just a nuclear explosion. Continuing their trek to Icarus 1, Dr. Serrano really needs to stop entering the tanning room as much as he is. As they link up the shields so they don't get deep fried extra crispy, like Captain, they sync perfectly and then enter the ship. Straight up Galaga that thing and just take the ship with you. Because that has the extra oxygen, I guess. So yeah, everything's turned up Millhouse. So looking around, the ship is covered in dust or human skin because 80% of all dust is human skin. Tasty. Suggesting splitting up, Captain America rightly brings up the prospect of aliens and how that's exactly what they want. Having never watched a horror movie ever, they do split up, but luckily for them, they find the oxygen ecosystem after 7 years now, which I thought was 3 or 4, actually is working as intended. So they have O2, and they don't have to eat Trey to stop him from using oxygen. Good news for him. So the water also still works, which is recycled crew urine. And speaking of crew, there are no bodies anywhere. Entering the jungle ecosystem, they then watch a video on the crew crashing out hard about being dust and nothing more. He says it's not their place to challenge God. Well, maybe, but I don't remember reading anywhere that the Lord said he would take out the sun. So as far as I know, it would be our job to restart that bad boy. Humanity number 1. Continuing to search the ship, they then find the crew. They all just sort of sat together in the sunroom and burned themselves to death and then turned to dust. Once again, something stupid happens, as it was expected to, as Icarus 1 breaks from Icarus 2 on the airlock. Also, I just pieced together, calling these things Icarus is like the worst omen, on par with let me call my ship the Unsinkable, or someone calling on a radio as a first responder, sure it is quiet tonight. There are things that you just don't do, and this is one of them. I actually write these in 2 days, so this realization was before I had the intro written. Still tracks, though. So the airlock is then broken off as they won't be able to dock once more. Then checking the suits, there is only one left. The captain then gets upset, saying, well, I needed to get back to the ship because I'm the captain. You're not that important. They instead are sending Scarecrow. The plan here is to be Giga Chads and then jump across with no suits, and that's going to be painful. Also, don't miss. One person has to stay behind, though, to separate the 2 ships, as the captain says everyone is thinking it must be him. He's like, oh, you think it's me, right? I'm the one that has to... And then during that embarrassing crash out, Dr. Serrano's like, nah, I'll do it. Ugh, that's going to be awkward to hang out with people later. So anyways, everybody just kind of gets ready to blow out their eardrums, and then holding on to Scarecrow, the captain gets blasted into space anyhow, which blows, because not only did he die, but his last actions were to die as a coward. Rough. So as Captain America and Scarecrow manage to get in, the captain then dies out there, not instantly, as you would need about a minute or a minute and a half. So he just starts freezing and then loses an arm, which you would not freeze that quickly, but losing that arm, ouchies. But not for long, as the sun's rays then hit him and he is obliterated. You would in fact die that quickly though, which totally sucks, but on to bigger matters. Dr. Serrano then sits with the crew as he's left behind, and they tell him, oh, we love you, Dr. Serrano. Serrano is then exposed to the sun and deep-fried extra crispy next. Given his skin condition, they might have actually just saved him a slow cancerous death anyhow. So back on the ship, they talk about if the airlock was sabotaged or not. However, they are down to 2 people, so they need just 1 more to go away so that they can make it to the sun. Trey might be the guy they go with, as then they ask what they should do. They need to vote on it, as Cass over here says, well, I know what we're doing, but I'm not going to do it. And they're like, okay, well, we need to do it anyway. So someone needs to bite the dust. Captain America then heads back to Trey, as it's his fault anyway, says, oh no, Trey, you were meant for so much more. Why did you take yourself out? You could have given Captain America PTSD. Anyways, after seeing Trey taken out by a severe nosebleed and nothing more, YouTube mods, Captain America then says he took responsibility. Captain America now freaks out on Scarecrow for some reason, blaming him. But it was his responsibility. Anyways, Scarecrow is not the one who made all this happen. It was Trey. Don't really know how it's this dude's fault, but hey, it's because he's got that bad boy persona. Anyways, having another stupid fight, they then break it up as they head closer to the sun. As they check on the oxygen reserves, Cortana then tells them they're all dying. Thanks. Needed that vote of confidence. Cortana then tells him there are 5 crew members, as the 5th is an unknown. He is then informed that he is in the observation room. Taking his segue over there, I want to remind you, they made this movie, by the way. They could have used so many cooler forms of transportation. Instead, they gave him a Segway. So he enters the room as a man then asks if he's an angel. Saying he's been waiting so long, Scarecrow asks who he even is. Bro continues saying the usual nonsense of a madman, that man is gonna die out and it's not our job to play God and blah, blah, blah. Look, I have one thing to say about that crap. Infections. Look, I'm part of the God Squad. I'm flooredbythelord.com, but all throughout human history, man has prayed for deliverance from hardships, the big one being sickness. Bacteria, specifically like the plague, was humanity's biggest hater. Untold amounts of us have prayed for a cure and still died because we didn't have one. And now we do. Answered prayers? Maybe, but the reality is, at least from my layman's perspective, saving Earth has 2 possible outcomes. Either it works or it doesn't. From this guy's perspective, God's will happen one way or another regardless of human intervention, as it cannot be stopped if it is truly his will. Using that logic then, keep trying to save Earth. If you succeed, then it was God's will. However, as I suspect what is about to happen is this dork is going to actively intercede on what he imagines God's will is, in which case you are enforcing your will, not God's. So if that's the case, and you truly believe in God's will, then the mission should proceed, and ultimately outcome could be regarded as such that it was God's will whether it fails or succeeds. This guy's logic, conversely, is dumb as hell. And because of this, he deserves to be tossed out in the full luminosity of the sun for not logicking this for more than about half a second. Of course, isolation for years will drive you crazy, which we'll talk about the biological implications of that later. So approaching Scarecrow, Pinbacker as he's called, then attacks him, slashing him. He then tells Cortana to open the shutters as he flame broils him even deeper as he tries going after Scarecrow once more. Failing his follow task, Scarecrow sees his wounds as Frank Manera here goes and starts pulling cooling towers out of Cortana. Continuing their approach of the sun, nobody heard Scarecrow as hydroponicist realizes one of the plants actually survived, but she gets stabbed in the back by Frank. He tells her not to fight it, which, yeah, bro, fat chance, keep fighting, as Scarecrow then puts on a vest to provide pressure to his wound. Of course, it's just a little slash. It didn't really look that deep. I mean, would it be painful? Yes. I don't think it really hit anything major, but Captain America here is meandering around as the power then goes off. Captain America walks around looking for anyone, as now that I think about it, with hydroponicist gone, their oxygen issue sort of resolved itself as love interest of Scarecrow gets followed. Captain America now spots Scarecrow as he talks to him, as he's informed Frank is on the ship. Love interest then continues hiding as the coolant levels are down. Not ideal. Jumping into the coolant, Frank continues stalking love interest, emerging from the coolant. The power is then restarted as love interest spots Frank. She stabs him, and it appears like that at least, as he starts freaking out. Meanwhile, Captain America gets almost trapped, but is able to escape. Hydroponicist has succumbed to her wound, as she is then sat up, holding the plant, the last plant that would have saved him. Tough break. Frank doomed all of them by pulling that plan out. Way to go, doucher. As Captain America is extra cold from his coolant dip. Heading back under to get the tower to go, back into the coolant. He's able to get it unstuck, but literally get his leg, like, it's totally pinned. God bless it, bro. So telling Scarecrow to just do it, that appears to have taken out Captain America. I have no idea how. I guess he froze to death in there. It severed an artery. I just genuinely don't understand. But donning a suit, he goes to the emergency release to open up the airlock. Blowing the door, everything is then sucked out, which I'm assuming Frank is as well. And seeing Captain America done so, sucks to be you. That coolant was super cool, I guess. Initiating the separation, the payload is then prepped for launch as they blast that bad boy off, which will either be successful or everyone back on Earth is completely screwed. Losing his footing like a dork, Scarecrow then slams his head into his helmet for some reason as the payload is already blasted off. Why freak out now? I mean, you did the job, right? Opening the front door, he then watches the payload head out, as then he goes to look at the sun before blasting off with it, which I guess beats a slow death, am I right? So as the engine ignites... Okay, wait. So the ship that they were on was supposed to have a return mission, right? because those went off really quickly and then just blasted apart the ship. I wouldn't even pretend to understand why they chose that ignition timing, but whatever. So Icarus 2 then blows up as Scarecrow now enters the ship portion of the payload. As it descends, he then hangs out with the concussive force detonators, and realizing Cass is in there, he asks her if he's in there with him. Honestly, hold out for like 1 minute, I guess. Even Vegeta could do that against Boo. Which, oh god, he's in here. For 7 years, evidently, Frank spoke with God, saying he told him to take all of them to heaven. Grabbing his skin, his arm meat is then taken to heaven as Cass and Scarecrow fall. She tells him to finish him, as Scarecrow does not do much of anything, but they've entered the sun's corona anyways. So heading to the south pole of it, he then heads in and primes the payload. There was no way to do this from the ship, apparently. Okay, so getting everything started, the cube then falls as everything around them goes big bang. Closing his eyes, everything stops in front of him somehow, unlikely, as he's gonna definitely be blinded by this. But back on Earth, everything is colder as his family receives the call back home from earlier. As they look at the sun, it then brightens up, having succeeded in their mission, at least for now. Of course, there's still the question of why did this happen in the first place? Well, who knows? Because thus concludes Sunshine. Hello and welcome to the science portion. You know what's strange about humanity? The random fixations that we form and the complete absence of other humans or animals, which are technically still animals like we are, but as far as I know, I can't hold an entire back and forth conversation with my orange cat Dr. Mambo, not because he's a cat, but because he's orange. We purposely trained him wrong, you know, as a joke. Anyhow, my rambling here is more to draw attention to the idea that in a complete and utter isolation event, humans will not only talk to themselves, but as time passes, things will begin to talk back to us. This is because innately we are complex social creatures whose brains crave connection and novelty to a degree, I guess you could call it. One of the great examples is in actually the movie Castaway. Prometheus ends up communicating with a volleyball and then loses said volleyball. If you've seen it, the loss of Wilson is absolutely devastating. But it's not only that, because actually that's a protective mechanism in the brain in order to preserve its sense of sanity and normalcy by keeping one area specifically kind of I guess, stimulated. Sounds pretty messed up, but that's actually how it is. But what's interesting is if this process goes on for too long, then physical structures in the brain will begin to atrophy to a degree, resulting in the brain's behavior and communication abilities being altered and disrupted respectively. However, then you add into the mix the issue of radiation blasting the brain continually, and you've got yourself a rather interesting problem that begins to emerge. Complete dissolution of one of the three structural models of the psyche, at least allegedly. And I mean, depending on how much you trust Sigmund Freud, this is going to kind of color this whole science section, but even without the aid of modern mapping of the brain back in his time, a lot of the ideas that he was suggesting can still be associated with specific areas of the brain today. So let's do a quick rundown, which will help to explain the absolute psychosis Abraham Drinkin here was having at the end, because Frank Monero was just lost in the sauce. So let's start from the top down, shall we? Which I said a quick rundown, but this isn't going to be a quick rundown at all. We're actually going to learn about the psyche. So the superego of man is the part of the brain or personality that is said to kind of act as an internalized moral authority on all matters, no matter if you understand it or not. And that's why we have so many Instagram politicians right now, or just in general people who comment on world events and are like, well, you know, because it's just like, bro, you were literally just packing fries the other day. What do you know about this? What do any of us know about this? Because most of us aren't even in the military. Anyways, I'm not going to even go there. The point is, this part of the psyche judges the world around you and enforces your morals and attempts to shape the world around you in a way that aligns with how you think things should be done. This portion of personality and the brain, I guess, will form from influence concerning your parents, authority figures, the culture you grow up in, being a big one, and also religion. This is the voice in your head that asks what is right, not what do you want or what should be considered realistic. So it's the angel on your shoulder, so to speak. In some people, this is much stronger than others, and in some, it actually appears to be non-existent. However, in those who are dominated by this area of the brain, they can actually become zealots of sorts, absolutely sure what they are doing is the correct thing, no matter what is said to the contrary, and that part is a bit important. The superego itself is claimed to reside in several areas of the brain necessary for judging the world around you. Areas mostly associated with the prefrontal cortex of the brain, but more specifically, areas within such as the ventromedial, responsible for moral judgment and determining values. Another area would be the orbitofrontal cortex, which takes into consideration how socially things operate around you. The anterior cingulate cortex, which is interesting as people with severe anxiety appear to actually have a disruption in this area of the brain, but this keeps track of guilt, errors, and conflicts. And the insula, which actually operates concerning moral disgust, which I've learned over the years is quite strong in me, and apparently my insula is maybe operating a little higher than it probably should be. But the ego is there to mediate. I've heard it said prior, but you can kind of think of your brain as if like you're in the middle, trying to figure out what the monkey and the man want. Sometimes the monkey wins, sometimes the man wins, but it's important to feed both. That's what the ego does. This part of you is rather important as this appears to be you. When interacting with anyone, this is the personality most engaged with the other egos surrounding you. As the environment changes, the ego must change with it. Its whole purpose is to sort of be an entry point for information coming in to your personality. Incoming stimulus is detected, it is then run through the ego itself, which now has a decision to make based on the superego's input, and the id, which we will get to momentarily. As the ego weighs these options, a decision will be reached, and then the meat suit follows through on whatever that decision is. The ego isn't just influenced entirely through input by the superego and the id. Instead, it can actually weigh these options based on what realistically is able to be accomplished, and depending on the extraneous factors surrounding that choice, the superego can be completely ignored, or the id can be completely ignored, or they can be factored in. It just really depends. Those who operate more on the superego side, zealots. Those who operate more on the id side, degenerates. The ego itself is stated to mostly reside within the prefrontal cortex, and if you notice, the area of the cerebrum highly developed, given that we are human, will actually house these more complex pieces of machinery concerning the psyche. I mean, that is why it developed, right? The idea stems from the fact that there are several different areas of the brain in neurology moving up from the brainstem, which is kind of more instinct-based, like the pons medulla, the brainstem, the medulla oblongata, to the cerebrum, which is more complex. It's a bit dated, but you basically have lizard brain, mammal brain, and then primate brain as you move towards the cerebrum. Again, dated, but it's more referencing at this point the instinctual areas of the brain are more towards the base of the brain near the brainstem than at the cerebral level, which is where the superego and ego reside. And also, as a fun fact, your neurons are more resilient in your brainstem than your cerebrum, and this is why if there's ever an issue where you are like suffocated or something like that, they can keep you alive because your brainstem is still alive, because it actually has kind of more, I guess, ATP currency than the rest of your neurons, so it's more resistant to oxygen deprivation because it's trying to keep you alive. And that's what actually agonal breathing is, when you're basically at the very end and you're not coming back. It's your brainstem trying to be like, ooh, hey, we're really low in oxygen. Your brain's already dead, but the brainstem's like, yeah, I think I can keep us alive. So that's what agonal breathing is. So if you see agonal breathing, it's not good. But the ego itself will develop through more stimulus-based actions. Things like interactions with the world around you, social feedback from other people, calling you a nerd for watching Roanoke gaming until they realize you're absolutely based for doing so, trial and error, and how you socially integrate yourself. The main thing about the ego, however, is it requires this stimulus. It's not a, oh, well, maybe not. Without it, issues begin to arise, keeping the other two yous in check. That's kind of important. The ego itself within the frontal lobe actually will reside in the dorsolateral area, which actually houses logic and inhibition, and the ventromedial area, which is known to be associated with emotional regulation and moral integration. These areas are closely connected to the superego, and it tracks as to why. Given that humanity is a highly social species, moral operations need to be paramount concerning the group's overall success. For instance, if food is scarce for a tribe and you have one doucher stealing, well, then they can be sniffed out and exiled. However, if the entire group decides to start stealing from one another, then everyone is going to starve, or fighting will break out, totally destroying the social fabric of that society. So, these areas of the brain are always engaged. This is why it makes me sort of laugh when I see comments from people mentioning how, oh, I don't need anyone, and I just prefer to be alone all the time. Like, don't get me wrong, alone time is fantastic. It does help you reset. But anyone in true isolation or who has been in it knows what it feels like. It really does begin to affect your brain, and it is very uncomfortable, but we'll get to exactly why that is happening neurologically. Frank Manera was just straight up not having a good time. Now, the last version of you is the id, which is the monkey, so to speak. We are animals at the end of the day, and as a result, we have wants and needs, but mostly wants that may be seen as more of the selfish variety. This is like stealing fruit away from a fellow member of your social group, basically. This guy has been here since the beginning, and he kind of sort of sucks. I mean, at least from my view of it. That could be my superego talking, probably, who knows. Technically speaking, it's more in line with the instinctual part of you, and its job is to keep you alive. You can't just fall on your sword all the time, basically. So no, the id is not just a me, I. It really does have a purpose, and this is the guy that is there with you from the drop. The clean slate just flipped on the new build computer for the first time, whereas the superego is acquired. The ego is gained from social interactions, and the id is the most basic form of you. Selfish, impulsive, seeking immediate gratification from the world around you. It's not something to be despised, it's just you, but it does house important functions. The id thrives in what can be considered the selfish realm of self, but this is where survival instincts will also kind of just exist. Other more basic needs, such as hunger and thirst, are also a part of it as well as sexual drive to have your genes passed to the next generation, which is important to the overall survival of humanity. So even in selfishness, hey, that's good. So aggression and violence as well is a big part of it, because bears and wolves aren't going to sit down with you and hash out why they need to eat you and then listen to reason as why they don't. Fear is also a part of the id because the world is dangerous. It is dangerous. I will never understand why people they do things where it's like, oh, everything is fine. There's no need to defend myself, or I'm gonna go walk down a trail alone. If my girlfriend's watching this, stop doing that. It's dangerous out there, man. Again, bears and wolves. I mean, the other most dangerous predator on this planet towards humanity is other humans. Anyways, that's why I hike with her now. So the thing about this being your base operating system is these neurons are fast. Faster than your brain typically has to react to anything else. This is why, men catch crap for it a lot, and I'm not excusing it, but it's like, okay, this is gonna upset 10% of my audience. Sometimes, as a male, you're just scanning a room, and then a pattern catches your eye, right? And it's like you're not thinking about anything. You're not specifically zoning in on that. It is pure instinct. And then you're like, oh, and then you look away. Well, some people look away, some people don't. Some people continue to stare. You get caught by a girlfriend, your mom, whatever, doesn't matter. And it's like, well, that's awkward. That's the point, that is the instinctual id, I guess you could say, at play in males. Now, for women, I don't really know how they do it. I don't really know what you guys are looking for as far as your id. I guess I could ask, but would I be told? I don't even know. So, but this from a male perspective, that's what that is, if you've ever wondered. Anyways, the regions in which the id resides considered to be more of like a lizard brain, as mentioned earlier. Areas such as the amygdala, which if you watch this channel for any amount of time, you know its function, that being fear, aggression, and threat detection. Other areas such as the hippocampus, which regulates thirst, disgust, desire for sex, temperature, and also aids in hormone regulation. So that's out of whack. It's not good. The brainstem, which regulates breathing rate, heart rate, a lot of autonomic functions of the body, which, by the way, we're all now manually breathing, but I'm here in solidarity with you because every time I do that to myself as well. I do it when I write it, and then I do it again when I read it. Why do I do this to myself? Well, it's probably the superego to make a really cool joke because the id would not want to do this to itself. Anyways, it also resides within the reward centers of the brain. Now, the big thing with the id is it will feel justified for the most part if the ego begins to weaken for one reason or another. So the superego makes you feel absolutely right, and the id makes you feel absolutely justified. What I also find interesting surrounding this whole topic is the split brain experiment. Now, not so much an experiment, it was done for medical procedure, but it involves cutting the corpus callosum. This area resides in the interior of the brain and allows for the left and right hemispheres of the brain to actually communicate with one another. When severing it, it becomes apparent that the brain is creepy as all get out in general when it can't talk to itself. It's kind of horrifying if you think about it. Interesting, but just like, oh, gross, because that's what I'm using to talk to you right now. The left hemisphere is where the language centers of the brain are located so that you can talk, but the right hemisphere can actively see what's happening but cannot actually speak itself or communicate to the left hemisphere what it is seeing. And given that the left hemisphere cannot actually talk to the right hemisphere as well, it will instead choose to make up things as to why the right side of the brain is doing something. So what does that look like? Well, basically, this experiment, words were on a screen and they were flashed to the man's right eye versus his left eye. The eyes, of course, going to the other hemisphere of the brain because they switch over. So when it came to words flashed on his left eye, his left hemisphere didn't functionally see the word. So his left hemisphere will report, I didn't see it. And that's what he will say. Yeah, I didn't see what the word was. However, when asked to shut his eyes and then draw what he saw, his right hemisphere will actually draw what the word was. In this case, a phone when the test was conducted, and then he drew the phone, which to the surprise of his left hemisphere, he says, oh, it's a phone. He had no idea what it was. While not exactly the same thing as the id and superego, it sort of shows that the ego is almost like the corpus callosum, unifying the two sides to communicate and keep everything moving smoothly. Should the corpus callosum be severed, and with it, the two hemispheres, it will actually create unique outcomes, much like the ego being severed, allowing for the superego and the id to sort of operate more dominantly and have much more input than they usually would. So, you're all caught up now, because now we need to discuss what is actually going on with Prometheus and why he is having the crash out of all crash outs that almost doomed an entire planet. Which, I mean, that could have been really bad, arguably. And to understand this, we need to make some assumptions about him and his daily operations on that ship. First, it appears as though these scientists were all dorks in their own rights. Sitting in the sunroom would be great and all, but the issue is, even with that filter on in front of you, you are still exposed to a ton of radiation. In fact, currently, it's just accepted that astronauts in space are going to get absolutely slapped with radiation from time to time. It is the nature of the beast. One of the fairly interesting aspects of being in space is that you don't have Earth's sweet, sweet magnetic field and ozone layer protecting you as much as you do down here on the surface. And even then, you can still get a sunburn. In low Earth orbits, or LEOs as they're called, I think, a lot of missions are still mostly protected by the magnetic field of Earth. While not perfect and incomplete in some areas, extremely weak at the poles and stronger at the equator, they are still exposed to radiation even within that magnetic field. It's just not as much to, be lethal, I suppose. Now, you can mitigate some of that by using shielding on the ship, such as heavy metals like lead and maybe some water, that sort of deal, but still, you will get hit with radiation. Now, you take the Apollo mission, which is going to explain what is happening with the Icarus mission here in a moment. These guys were pretty much completely unprotected from radiation. Some would claim pretty much exposed. Had the sun decided to belch at them in a solar flare that was undetected because we barely had technology in place to even figure out what was going to happen, then they would have been exposed to a ton of charged particles and actually never even made it in the first place, or made it home, or made it. They would have died for sure. But even in low Earth orbit, astronauts still report the same thing throughout pretty much every mission, flashes of light in their vision. It's not just like a quick one, but actually spots that appear. These spots are charged particles moving through the ship, through their body, and striking their retinas, activating them for a second when they do. Now, obviously, it's not aiming for the eyes. This is just happening all the time, all over their body. And this is way out here at like Earth levels. So there is sort of a natural thinning of the focus of these particles. Really, the only way around this is to create a magnetic field around the ship itself to deflect these particles like Earth does. In fact, completely unrelated, but I always like the idea of the Mass Effect kinetic barriers, because I just watched Starlink line go up, I think it was like 2 nights ago, going to dinner, and I was like, yo, how many of these things are up there? And is this going to become a problem at some point? I don't know. But I'm sure NASA's concerned. But what we don't know how to do yet anyways, apart from the kinetic barriers? We don't even know how to create a magnetic field around a ship to block charged particles. Because of this, as you approach the sun, the amount of charged particles will increase in density. It is the way of things. Now you may be saying, well, Roanoke, what about the giant shield in the front? And you are correct. I would hazard a guess as to say this shielding in particular actually does block charged particles and gamma radiation, as well as X-rays and all the other crap that emits from the sun. However, during its construction, it's clear concerns would arise. If you were to block the sun entirely, you are effectively further screwing with people psychologically on an already mentally debilitating trip. It is stated that the trip itself would take around 16 months or so. This means they would need to be traveling at roughly 5,000 miles per hour in the Lord's units, or 8,000 kilometers in heathen once the Earth to die out units. A year without sunlight is devastating. Your vitamin D levels would be critically low or just non-existent, which at that point, given it's a hormone regulator, this would have severe cascading consequences such as your bones basically becoming weaker and weaker until you couldn't even stand in the ship's artificial gravity. Your neurotransmitters would be disrupted, leading to violent outbursts or confusion. Sounds familiar. Your heart's rhythm would enter an arrhythmia, and then you die. To counter this, yes, you could waste, space on a ship by bringing supplements on an already preposterously heavy ship, or you could just create a room with a window that allows the sunlight so the crew can, lets the sunlight in, so the crew can get vitamin D directly from the source as we do all the time now. Which, if you thought it was weird why they had that room, that is exactly why they have that room. So the skin can still create vitamin D, and the circadian rhythm can actually be continually supported so the crew doesn't get completely lost in the sauce behind that shielding. But why would they allow the varying levels of light in? Why not just a window? Well, therein lies the issue of being further out versus closer in. When they started, the sun was already punking out on us, so 100% clear was probably fine. Probably not, because, you have a lot more stuff protecting your eyes from just the sun. However, being 36 million miles away, 4% blows out your retinas and gives you skin cancer. So then what happened to the crew? Well, here is how I see all of this going down, seeing the context clues throughout. Icarus 1 got close to the sun, but only one scientist in particular, much like Dr. Serrano, was already beginning to behave oddly based on the video logs that he was sending back. You can actually hear potentially the zealot behavior beginning to take place, which I will explain here momentarily as to why. As they continued their approach, much like Serrano, he would spend time in the sunroom, but likely much more time than what was necessary. As they approached, he would undergo the same exposure to radiation, which has consequences. As the crew got closer, it's unknown if all of them began to do this or maybe just him. I'm inclined to believe it was just him, however. Eventually, he would snap and attack the rest of his crewmates. Given that they were all likely nerds and never lifted weights in their life, their ability to fight back was limited at best against someone who was absolutely lost in the sauce. Not only would the superego make his resolve absolute in what he was doing, but the id would make him feel justified in what he was doing as well, as if he was basically doing the Lord's work because he just feels like he's doing the Lord's work. So given the fact that he propped up the hydroponesis, which is definitely not the word, but it's sticking, this shows a pattern of behavior he engaged in. The crew he was with were all propped up in the sunroom as well, as we have seen. And this means he alone was very likely responsible for their end. Now, them being in that room together, very likely they were positioned post-mortem. He would then increase the sunlight, but would be limited given their ship's Cortana. However, as a result, he would then disable Cortana, which is exactly what he did on Icarus 2. Nothing can possibly go wrong this time. He knew exactly where to strike concerning the cooling towers, and having done so, he would then probably go 100% exposure in the sunroom, which desiccated the meat suits, turning them to ash at that point. This left him completely alone, which would do several things. First, the initial radiation exposure levels would have already begun to damage the mitochondria within his brain cells. In some areas, it is very likely that this would in turn cause the white matter neurons, which are the neurons responsible to facilitate communication, to actually start dying off, and then his gray matter would also start dying off as well, leading to issues of processing. As the brain's internal communication system was disrupted, this would have radical impacts on his personality and ability to logically reason and think. As he continued to spend time in the sunroom more and more, dangerous levels of radiation that he was exposed to would continue to cause his brain damage to build up. What would likely start out as emotional outbursts, similar to what Captain America was doing, would build up in him faster due to his own negligence until the breaking point would be reached. Now, how exactly does this work? Well, I've talked about it before, but radiation is horrific for your cells. There are two types of damages that can incur, or be incurred, I guess, and their names sound inversely related: direct and indirect. Direct damage is when an actual particle strikes the nucleic backbone of your DNA. Composed of phosphate, this can actually cause single-strand breaks or double-strand breaks. If a single strand breaks, then it's not too terrible. Your body can fix this using the opposite side as a template. If a double strand breaks, then this causes your cell to really not know sometimes how to actually piece it back together properly, which best case scenario here, your cell takes itself out, which is actually during a sunburn. Your body creates a ton of thymine dimers because, well, your body doesn't create it. It's actually the UV radiation strikes two thymines next to each other on the same strand. They fuse together. It's not great. And then your cell tries to, engage in cellular division, which then doesn't work. So the point is that best case scenario here, your body is like, not your body, your cells are like, I'm just gonna take myself out because I can't even read my own DNA. Worst case scenario, it turns into cancer if the P51 gene is destroyed, which is the tumor suppression gene. Indirect damage doesn't sound as bad, but actually, I would argue it's worse because it's a lot more prevalent. Your body is roughly 70% water. The radiation absorbed by your body will literally heat up that water. The water heating up in your body on a cell-by-cell basis is terrible for your longevity. This will cause proteins to denature, can destabilize your genome entirely, and disrupt all cellular functioning. And not just that, at least with direct damage, there is a chance it won't happen because it's direct damage. It has to hit just right. But with indirect damage, all radiation has to do is strike a water molecule, adding energy to it. It could even just rip off electrons, which peroxidizes your cells. Peroxidizes? Yeah, peroxide. Yep. Anyways, it's not great. And this is what it's going to be doing, which is going to damage you if you didn't know. So this is everything that Frank Monera was being exposed to all of the time as he hung out in that room, at very likely even higher levels after the crew was already gone and Cortana was disabled, meaning these safety parameters were eliminated. Then everything already mentioned would continue to take place. Now, apart from the brain damage that would clearly be there, more so given when he was found, his skin was also absolutely destroyed, hinting at how much time he had spent in the tanning room. There would be another issue causing further decompensation of his mental status. So remember the discussion of the ego? The major determining factor here is the sheer amount of time spent alone. The superego is imprinted onto you and exists independently of those moral figures around you once it's already there. The id is your baseline existing no matter what. It's going to be there. The ego, however, requires, I guess, the friction of society, you could call it. It requires input. Without the constant workout stimulus keeping it relevant, I guess you could say, the ego actually weakens considerably. I've experienced this somewhat where I was left alone for a while, and you really do become obsessive over time, I guess. Or at least I did. Now, the brain could trend towards several things during this time frame if the ego weakens, and then maybe you're like reintroduced back into society. Who knows? Maybe the id may take over, and then you just become like, I don't know, a wart on the taint of society because you just do whatever you want to do. However, if the ego weakens and you are left with a giant glowing orb in the sky that gives you vitamin D, well, you might just start worshiping as a god, or worshiping it as a god, and communicating with it. This part is what's wild because for all intents and purposes, because of the complete lack of socialization and atrophying of the areas of the brain associated with the ego, the sun may actually start talking back to you, and it may even start telling you to do things that are antithetical to your goals. This is the superego talking to you completely uninhibited. Now, what I always find interesting about this ideology is where does this even come from in the first place? Spoiler alert, we don't have an answer, but I get having like morality and the need for ego to mediate as well as our baser instincts, but where does the concept of like a god come in at all? Well, it's a good question, isn't it? It appears as though humans are predispositioned to believe in a higher power as just a standard start point. And it would seem at some point that maybe the id then could be associated with it because it's like a baseline operation. But what's also interesting is there's always a shadow of doubt on both sides. Some people being staunch atheists, which I've heard many times, like they want to believe in something, but there's just not enough evidence for them to kind of make that leap. And then take the most devout religious figures you've ever seen, and while they might not admit it, they too have doubts. Really, nobody has any clue why we're here or what comes after. It's all theory and politics or whatever you want to believe, really. That's what's crazy about it. But fundamentally, our brains are geared towards the thought that there is a higher power somewhere. Whether you regard it as a literal god, or the universe, our brains grasp at something. But the point of this is that Frank has brain damage, combined with his alone time with the sun, ended up causing him to regard it as a god. Now, how did he come to the absolute conclusion that he was right in disrupting the missions? Well, his superego gave him the absolutism, and his id justified it, and his ego checked out. The fear of the sun going out, brought on by the id, and the religious zealot status, assuming the afterlife would be better, would cause him to engage in the dramatic actions he took, attempting to disrupt the sun's reignition. But anyhow, I want to hear what you guys think. Did you enjoy the outdated psychology lesson? Let me know. I don't even know if it's outdated, to be honest with you. Psychology is very interesting to me, but I'm sure there's more random stuff now. Anyhow, if you did enjoy, then please leave a like and a comment as to help get the video out there. Otherwise, you're a nerd if you don't do that. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Instagram, Roanoke Tales link, and Patreon in the description if you'd like to support the channel. And speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. At the Astronaut tier, we have Kusith and Lipsy Jinchi. Thank you guys for your awesome support. At the Astrophysicist tier, we have Death Dancer, Mayura, and Webtron Supreme. Thank you guys as well. And at the Scientist tier, we have Stutz, Frank Shaft Frank, Some Big Nerd, Metric System, Invictus Echo, Official Texan, a homeless guy on the street, Jason, and Scott Osteen. Thank you guys as well. And the rest of my patrons, I really do appreciate y'all's support. You're absolute ballers because you don't have to help me, but you choose to, and I thank you for that. All right, that's going to do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I'll see y'all in the next one.